Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and today I wanted to talk about working smart in your language learning. And I think that this is something that's really important if you want to make even more progress than you are right now in your language learning. And really, when we think about learning a foreign language, it's not just about putting in the time, right? That's obviously very important, but you also want to work smart. You want to make sure that the quality of the time that you put into language learning is very high. It's worth it, right? Because ultimately, in the end of the day, we're not trying to maximize the amount of time we spend with the language. We're trying to maximize our progress. And that's obviously going to be a combination of time and, of course, the quality of our study or what we're doing specifically. And I think that, especially as a beginner, it's very easy to not work very smart, or even just honestly later down the road. There's so many opportunities where we're doing things that are very inefficient or they don't make a lot of sense. And if we just change things up a little bit, you'll make more progress in the end of the day. You'll have more fun, and you're just going to get to your goals a little bit quicker. So I think it's really important to just think about this kind of concept throughout your entire language learning journey. So when we talk about working smart in language learning, I think that you can kind of see it manifested in a bunch of different areas. But just before we kind of jump into that, I think that it's really important just to remember that obviously you got to put in the time in the language learning process, right? It's really good to spend as much time as you can with the language, right? The more time you put in, the more results and more progress you're going to have. So I think that's really important to try to optimize. Try to get that number up as high as you possibly can, or you want to, and then from there we can optimize, the quality of that time, right? The strategy, the methods, the things that we're doing. Now, when we talk about working smart in language learning, I think that kind of a big area that you really want to focus in on in terms of working smart is with vocabulary. And there's so many different examples on how we could work smarter with our vocabulary acquisition or whatever it is. But sometimes you just got to think, what am I doing and does it really make sense? Does it make sense from just being the most effective I can with the time I put in, etc. So I think that one aspect of working kind of smart in language learning is just being really engaged, right? Making sure that the time that you put into the language learning process is good, right? It's good quality time. So for example, when you, let's say, are learning vocabulary with flashcards, right? Say the words out loud. Be really engaged. Turn off the phone, right? Turn off the music. Get rid of the distractions and be really engaged. Repeat the word after you review it. Try to quiz yourself, right? Because if you do those things, if you're engaged for that 30 minutes of time versus kind of being really distracted, you have music on, all these kind of different things going on, you're going to get more out of the time that you put into language learning when you're really engaged versus the time when you're distracted, right? 30 minutes of strong engagement with the vocabulary acquisition process could be just as effective as an hour where you're very distracted. So I think the first thing to just think about when working kind of smart in language learning is when you're going to put in time with language learning, and sometimes we're going to fail at this, be engaged. Try to have that really quality time where you're getting rid of the distractions, you're focused, you're doing all the things that you can do to maximize that kind of time, to make the most out of that time, whether it's repeating words out loud, quizzing yourself. So I think that's the first thing when we're talking about working smart. The second thing is the actual methods themselves. What are we doing to actually learn the words? What is our overarching strategy in the language learning process? And so I'll give you a good example. So sometimes with language learning, there's words that are really high value and it makes a lot of sense to learn them. And then there's words that don't make a lot of sense to learn, right? So obviously the most common words in a language, those are words that you're going to see a lot when you listen to audio content, when you're reading in a foreign language. And so, it makes a lot of sense to pick up those words. But then at times, maybe you're picking up a vocabulary list that has maybe 200 of the most common animals. And maybe you want to learn about animals. Maybe that's an interest of yours. But if you think about it, how often is that vocabulary list really going to pop up in your reading or in your audio content? Does it really make a lot of sense to put in a lot of time into this kind of vocabulary list? Not really, right? There's probably words out there that you can learn that are going to be way more impactful, whether it's learning some prepositions, very common prepositions, common verbs in the language, right? Versus this vocabulary list about animals, right? It doesn't have to be animals, it could be anything, but just think about like things like that, right? Where your time spent on vocabulary acquisition, just thinking of are the words that I'm learning impactful or not? right? Because if you're learning very common words in the language or words that you're going to see a bunch, ultimately when you play a game, play like a video game in a foreign language, you listen to a Netflix show, those words are going to help you way more in terms of enjoying compelling content to be more advanced than just some arbitrary animals that you learned in a vocabulary list. Now, obviously, this is kind of more of an extreme example, but just think about it in terms of things like this, right? Obviously, if you're using something like reading in a foreign language, you're going to pick up words that maybe you don't see very often. Maybe they're tied to a particular subject because you like reading about medieval history or technology. That's okay, right? You're obviously going to pick up words that are maybe less common that way. But just think about, what you're doing and does it make sense? I think another thing that kind of comes up too with the kind of working smart is there's like a completionist mindset for some people, right? And sometimes being a completionist is good, but other times it's really not, right? Where you feel like you're obligated to finish the course that you're doing before moving on to the next thing, right? Or you feel obligated to kind of pass this certain level of an app. Or finish a vocabulary list, or finish the book that you're reading because you're like 80% of the way done and you really want to finish it before moving on to something else. But in reality, or at times, being a completionist is actually harming you. You're not working very smart, right? So think about it from the perspective of you just want to complete this level in a language learning app, right? Well, maybe it makes a lot more sense to do something else with your time, right? To change your method up such that you're going to learn a lot more per hour of time versus feeling obligated to finish this level where it's not really going to help you, right? You're just trying to be a completionist, right? It could even be something like reading a book, right? Where you're kind of bored with the book. You're not engaged, and it makes a lot of sense to just pick up something different from a reading component, right? Pick up something that's more compelling, maybe easier, but there's maybe this obligation in the back of your mind that you want to be a completionist, you want to finish this, right? That's not working smart, right? So I think that you want to think about things like that too, right? Where are you doing activities for another reason, whether it's trying to maximize a streak, trying to be a completionist. You feel like you have to do this before moving on to the next thing. Maybe you might see this sometimes where people are a beginner and they feel obligated. They feel they need to finish this beginner textbook or this beginning material before moving on to compelling activity, or they need to finish their vocabulary list before using Netflix or speaking or whatever it is. Remember, these are just kind of arbitrary rules that you might create for yourself, and that's not really working smart. So I think that there's just too many examples to really cover here, but I think that you want to just look at the principle of this, right? Just take a step back and reflect for a second and ask yourself, what am I doing to learn the language? Is it effective? Could I be doing something different, right? And really kind of tackle all those core areas of the language process: vocabulary, listening, speaking, grammar, and really ask yourself, is this effective? Could I do something that's that's different, that's way more effective? And question why you're doing certain actions, a certain way. Because, when you kind of question them, you might find opportunities to improve or to change things up. This happened to me plenty of times. There's plenty of times where I really not worked smart in my language learning. And if I just would have changed things up and not resisted that change, I think I would have made more progress in the end of the day. And, it's not to say that I'm perfect in my language learning either, but I think that you want to be observant of working smart, because ultimately, if we're just doing the things that are going to be the most impactful, whether it's learning words quicker, whether it's having more fun, and then of course we put in that time in the language, ultimately that's going to result in faster progress, getting to your goals quicker. And so I think that it's really important to just always be thinking, am I working smart right now? And I think that, we might think we're really optimized and efficient, but there's plenty of opportunities, I think, to be even more effective, even if you're kind of very veteran language learner or so on and so forth. So, key kind of component here is to work smart in your language learning. Look for those opportunities where you can get more progress in the end of the day. So that's what I had to say. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.